On the night of October 29th, Ukrainian Defense Forces struck two Russian oil refineries, Novosposki in the Ulianovsk region and Maritsky in the Republic of Maryel. According to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, explosions and fires were recorded at both sites. The Budyonnovsky gas processing plant in the Stavropol region was also hit. A production unit there was damaged. These facilities have been put out of operation. This effectively means a reduction in the capabilities of the Russian army in the war against Ukraine. In Russia's Kemerovo region, a car was blown up with Police Lieutenant Colonel Veniamin Majoran, commander of the Omon Obereg Special Unit of the National Guard, inside. According to the main intelligence directorate of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, the eliminated Majoran was involved in war crimes against the civilian population of the Kyiv region. During the occupation in 2022, it was his unit that took part in punitive operations in Bucha and neighboring villages. According to Ukrainian intelligence, the bombing of the Omon commander is a reminder of the inevitability of punishment for those involved in crimes against Ukrainians. A total of 122 combat clashes have been recorded on the front line, literally since the beginning of the day. This was reported by the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. Meanwhile, the Kremlin dictator, Putin, made yet another absurd statement, claiming that Ukrainian troops are allegedly surrounded in Pokrovsk and Kupiansk. How the armed forces of Ukraine responded to the Kremlin's latest fake, as well as more details about the overall situation at the front, coming up next.
More than 10 armored vehicles, about 15 cars, several tanks and 5 artillery systems were destroyed in the southern Slobozansky direction by the warriors of the Skiff Brigade of the Ukrainian National Guard. In addition, the defenders destroyed several Russian radar stations, ammunition depots, and struck enemy concentrations and dugouts. Meanwhile, in the Lyman direction, the aggressor launched attacks in the areas of the settlements of Redkodub, Karpivka, and Novoselivka. In the Pokrovsk sector, intense fighting took place near Nikanorivka, Rodinske, Kotlin, Molodetske, Novopavlivka, Novoekonomichne, and Mirnohrad. And on the Oleksandrivka section of the front, the defense forces repelled Russian assaults near Novoselivka, Sosnivka, Stepove, Rybne, Novorihorivka, as well as Vishneve.
The enemy cannot effectively deploy large reserves or operate very efficiently in terms of advancing. On the one hand, we are striking them with fire strikes, drone strikes, and on the other hand, it is difficult for them to move along the front line. Therefore, there are objective indicators that the enemy is bogged down. And on the other hand, of course, it is also tough work for us there. But right now, there are no tactical breakthroughs, as the enemy claims. They constantly report this in their official public channels. We are still controlling the situation with our main firepower. And of course, we are conducting specific special operations to neutralize this group of infiltrators.
Meanwhile, the Russian dictator Putin made a statement claiming that supposedly Ukrainian forces are blocked in Kupiansk and Pokrovsk, and the Russian armed forces are allegedly ready to allow media representatives, including Ukrainian and foreign journalists, into the so-called encirclement zone so that they can supposedly see with their own eyes what is happening there. The armed forces of Ukraine refuted the statement of the Kremlin dictator, calling it a fabrication and fantasy. According to Ukrainian military officials, not even Putin's loyal audience will believe this lie. Ukrainian armed forces soldiers noted that heavy fighting is taking place in the vicinity of Kupiansk and Pokrovsk. The invaders are merely trying to break into populated areas and gain a foothold there. And the flag that the Russians hung on the stele at the entrance to Pokrovsk remained there for less than an hour.
For Putin, every city is absolutely crucial in terms of demonstrating power. The Russian army, the so-called might of the Russian army, as a tactic, they very actively use their own personnel as suicide operatives, having them dress as civilians and risk their lives to sneak through defensive lines to certain locations just to raise the Russian flag, even if only briefly, before it is taken down. They record all this on a Mavic drone, which flies in and then declare that this area is definitely under their troops' control. But in reality, this is just bravado, and this information does not correspond to the facts. Putin needs this so he can show that his words, like "now we will conquer Ukraine," do not match his actual actions or real capabilities.
Footage of combat operations in the Konstantinovka direction was shared by fighters of the 28th Separate Brigade named after the Knights of the Winter campaign. With the help of drones, they detect and precisely destroy enemy equipment. In particular, FPV drones burned several cannons that the Russian invaders tried to camouflage, as well as a shelter for the invaders' personnel, together with the infantry. Agents of the partisan movement Atesh set fire to a relay cabinet in temporarily occupied Tokmak, Zaporizhzhia region. It provided the Russians with control over train movements on a critically important route. The Russian occupiers used this railway junction to transfer military equipment, ammunition and personnel to the Zaporizhzhia direction. The sabotage disrupted the schedule of military transports and will complicate the maneuvering of Russian troops. Defense Forces drones struck a Panzer S-2 surface-to-air missile system. 2 oil depots and 2 Russian radar stations were hit in occupied Crimea. And in the past 24 hours, Defense Forces eliminated 1,150 Russian occupiers. Thus, according to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Russia's total combat losses since the start of the full-scale war have almost reached 1,140,000 people. In addition, the day before, Defense Forces destroyed 4 Russian tanks, 3 armored vehicles and 20 artillery systems. Also, 1 Russian multiple-launch rocket system and 81 units of automotive and special equipment were destroyed.
Ukraine sincerely wishes Argentina success in implementing the necessary reforms. The leaders agreed to maintain contact between their teams in order to jointly advance new cooperation projects. US President Donald Trump intends to increase pressure on Putin if he does not agree to end the war against Ukraine. This was stated by US Ambassador to NATO Matthew Whitaker. He noted that sanctions are only part of the measures envisioned by the White House.
We have imposed these sanctions and intend to stick to them. Perhaps this will force Putin to come to the negotiating table and put an end to the war, or at least agree to a ceasefire so that a final solution can be worked out. The new measures from Washington, this is only the beginning. President Trump holds all the cards. This is just one of them. There are many more. Matthew Whitaker, US Ambassador to NATO, in an interview with Bloomberg.
Only through joint efforts can the countries of the world force Russia to end the war. This was stated by Mikhailo Podolyak, advisor and head of the Office of the President of Ukraine, on the Freedom TV channel. He noted that one of the main tasks at the moment is to force the aggressor country to retreat and return to solving its internal problems.
Through joint efforts, Europe, the US, Ukraine, neutral countries, for example, the Middle East, various countries and so on, even China, if it eventually realizes that it is strategically disadvantageous to keep the world in a state of major war or on the brink of a major war, then of course it will be possible to put enough pressure on Russia to... I understand that modern Russia will never be in an adequate state. It's impossible. With the kind of elite that Putin has brought in, you can't have an effective competitive country, and so on. That's an objective fact. But in principle it is possible to force it to back off out of fear. Somewhere, yes, to hide and deal with their own internal problems which will come crashing down on their heads and so on. That is the main task.
US President Donald Trump is capable of helping Ukraine and Russia move closer to ending the war, but he cannot force the sides to do so. This was stated by US Vice President J.D. Vance. He added that the territory being seized by the Russians is very insignificant, but at the same time, Russia is losing a great many soldiers.
We truly believe that the time has come when it is in the interests of both Russia and Ukraine to cease hostilities. But President Trump can only open the door. He cannot force either side to walk through it. J.D. Vance, Vice President of the United States, on the air of the Force One podcast.
If the European Union decides to confiscate Russia's frozen assets, it will be a signal to Putin that he will not win a war of attrition. This was stated by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. And according to him, if a decision is made soon, it will provide Kyiv with stable support that will not depend on the political situation. My colleague will continue this topic. Andrei Dimitrenko.
The Netherlands supports the transfer of frozen Russian assets to Ukraine, Foreign Minister David van Weil stated at a meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. These funds are urgently needed to ensure the security of the Ukrainian budget. But we need to consider the issue of people and finances. Of course, a country like Belgium, which holds the majority of the funds, will want guarantees that we will do this collectively. But I hope that we will be able to reach an agreement on this issue. I don't know if it will happen before Christmas. I love Christmas presents, so I hope that will be the case for us and for Ukraine. The leaders of the northern European countries support using frozen Russian assets to help Ukraine and expect that a decision could be made at the European Council meeting in December, Swedish Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson said. This concerns the creation of a mechanism that would allow Ukraine to be provided with a loan of 140 billion euros. The European Council is currently considering the technical aspects of this initiative, the head of the European Commission explained. The proposal is to use these funds to provide Ukraine with a loan which Ukraine would have to repay if Russia pays reparations. And therefore, from a legal standpoint, this is a justified proposal. The European Council has requested possible options for resolving the technical issues, but the main message to Russia is absolutely clear. We are ready to cover Ukraine's financial needs and we will support it for as long as necessary.
Belgium has the decisive say when it comes to granting Ukraine a reparations loan. After all, the majority of Russia's frozen assets are located there, in the Euroclear Bank depository. And Brussels insists that any plan must include a reliable mechanism for sharing risks among all EU member states. From a legal standpoint, this is a complex task, but the allies are fully on schedule according to German Foreign Minister Johann Wadephul.
We must continue to work diligently to maintain the overall effectiveness of support for Ukraine in both the medium and the long term, and that is exactly why these important considerations and plans for utilizing frozen Russian assets remain in place. I assume that if the Commission presents the appropriate plans, decisions could be made as early as
December. Prime Minister Robert Fico is scaring Europeans with international legal disputes, while Viktor Orbán is warning of war with Russia. And he insists that Europe urgently needs to sit down at the negotiating table with Moscow. And in his opinion, this needs to be done in Budapest.
This is a Russian-European conflict that could become a harbinger of war. The escalation of the conflict can only be prevented through direct negotiations between Russia and Europe. We have insisted on this during meetings in recent days. Viktor Orbán, Prime Minister of Hungary, Facebook.
If EU member states decide to confiscate the assets, it will send a clear signal to Putin. The president of Ukraine stated that Moscow will not win a war of attrition.
If we make this decision regarding the assets, no one will be able to stop it afterwards. No matter how things change, no matter what the policies of future G7 leaders are, whoever comes to power, they won't be able to stop the decision once Ukraine starts receiving these funds in tranches and decides where to allocate them, whether for weapons or something else. This is our political victory. God willing, they will push through from political to practical implementation of this. They are very close. Volodymyr Zelensky, President of Ukraine, at a meeting with journalists from the Ukrinform news agency. According to
political reports that the European Commission is preparing a document with several options for supporting Ukraine, including issuing joint debt and a reparations loan based on Russian assets. At the next meeting of the European Council, there will be a discussion and we hope a final decision will be made, said European Commission representative Paula Pinho.
Ukraine is closing its embassy in the Republic of Cuba. This was announced by Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha. The decision to downgrade diplomatic relations between the countries was made due to the Cuban authorities' support of Russian aggression against Ukraine, as well as the mass recruitment of Cubans into the army of the occupying country.
Our stance is not directed against the Cuban people. We respect their right to live in prosperity. It is directed against the inaction of the Cuban authorities in response to the mass conscription of Cuban citizens into the Russian occupation army. Thousands of them have signed contracts, joining the ranks of soldiers directly participating in combat operations on Ukrainian soil. Havana's unwillingness. To stop the mass recruitment of its citizens for Russia's war against Ukraine amounts to complicity in aggression and must be firmly condemned.
Andriy Sybiha, who is the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, posted a message on the social network X, which is a popular online platform for sharing news and updates. On October 28th, it was reported that a tanker, which had been following its usual route, suddenly turned around and sharply reduced its speed. According to analysts, this unexpected maneuver is believed to be connected to the recent tightening of American sanctions against the Russian oil companies Rosneft and Lukoil. These sanctions, imposed by the United States, are designed to limit the activities of these companies, and as a result, vessels associated with them may be changing their routes or behaviors to avoid possible consequences. The situation is being closely watched by experts and officials, as it could have further implications for the region. Putin is not ready to make compromises during peace negotiations on Ukraine. He intends to continue the war until he achieves his goals on the battlefield. This assessment of the situation was given by United States intelligence, which presented it to American officials and members of Congress. This was reported by ABC News. Intelligence officers believe that Putin has taken a more aggressive stance than ever since the start of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. This was influenced by the heavy losses suffered by the Russian army and problems in the economy, which in the fourth year of the war is on the verge of slipping into recession. Now, in order to justify these losses, he is trying to seize more Ukrainian territory, as noted by US intelligence. Germany will equip its brigade in Lithuania with strike drones. To this end, Berlin plans to sign a major contract for the supply of kamikaze drones with defense startups, Helsing and Stark, as well as with the Rheinmetall Group. According to the National Times, a total of up to 12,000 strike drones are planned to be produced. Some of them will be delivered to arm the new German brigade in Lithuania to protect NATO's eastern flank. The European Parliament is considering blocking access to Russian propaganda websites, including Sputnik and Russia Today, on all devices and networks of the Parliament. This was reported by Politico. Despite EU sanctions against Russian media, dozens of such websites remain accessible. If the proposal is approved, it will be similar to existing restrictions, such as the ban on using TikTok in the European Parliament for cybersecurity reasons. The EU will allocate €250 million for infrastructure development and countering drones. This was announced by the Polish Minister of Internal Affairs after negotiations between government delegations of European countries in Gdansk. Warsaw will seek to increase funding, emphasized Marcin Kierwiński. Moscow has intensified hybrid attacks in Europe. In this way, the aggressor country is testing the Europeans' response, their ability to make decisions, and their willingness to use force. This is the opinion of Kyrylo Budanov, head of the main intelligence directorate of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine. Kristina Dombrovska will tell you more about this.
Countering hybrid threats from Russia and Belarus. This was the main topic of the meeting of the interior ministers of Finland, Denmark, Norway, Lithuania, Latvia, Poland, Germany, Sweden, and Estonia in Gdansk on October 28.
Recent events in Poland, Denmark, Germany, and Lithuania have shown that there are now also attempts to influence Europe from the air. EU member states must have the tools to detect and counter such activities. EU member states located on the eastern border play an especially important role in ensuring the security of Europe as a whole. Therefore, the Union's support in combating drones and other aerial threats is crucial in the current financial period, which will end in 2027. Maria Rantanen, Minister of the Interior of Finland, from a statement on the ministry's website.
Just last week, Lithuania was forced several times to close airports in Vilnius and Kaunas. According to the Lithuanian State Border Guard Service, since the beginning of 2025, there have already been 500 recorded cases of violations of the country's airspace by balloons, so-called weather probes from Belarus.
The Ministry of Defense will take action, and to date, trial reconnaissance operations have been conducted. The army will take all necessary measures, including kinetic ones, to shoot down the balloons. They will start doing this. In this way, we are once again sending a signal that we are ready to take even the toughest measures when our airspace is violated. We do not rule out the possibility not only of coordinating actions with our neighbors, but also of discussing the activation of NATO Article 4.
After Lithuania closed its border with Belarus in response to provocations, officials in Vilnius stated that if necessary, they could also halt Russian transit to Kaliningrad.
We reserve the right to close the transit if it is necessary to ensure our security. Of course, this will be done in coordination with EU institutions and member states. Kęstutis Budrys, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Lithuania, speaking on LRT radio.
The Baltic countries have become a testing ground for Russian hybrid warfare tactics, according to Estonia's Minister of Internal Affairs, Igor Taro. Drones are increasingly violating the airspace of European countries. In the fall of 2025 alone, about 15 European airports suspended operations due to reports of drone sightings. On October 27th in Spain, an unidentified drone was spotted for the first time over the runway of Alicante-Elche Airport, according to the Spanish publication EFEA.
Russian aggression has intensified. It has spread even further west. Every month, Ukraine suffers from an increasing number of drones launched for attacks. And last month, we saw 19 such drones over the Polish border. A few days later, we saw Russian aircraft violate Estonian airspace. At the same time, Russia launched a coordinated campaign to undermine the elections in Moldova. Here at home, we continue to defend ourselves every day against threats that range from the seabed to cyberspace.
In the Kremlin, all these facts are called provocations and their involvement is denied. On October 28th, the head of the Russian Foreign Ministry, Lavrov, stated that Russia allegedly had no intention and has no intention of attacking any NATO or EU country. At the same time, Moscow is openly threatening the world with nuclear weapons. The chief of the General Staff of the Russian Armed Forces, Gerasimov, reported to Putin that on October 21st, a cruise missile test was conducted, the Burevestnik, with a nuclear power unit. Norway confirmed that the Russian missile was launched from the archipelago Novaya Zemlya in the Barents Sea, writes Reuters, citing data from Norway's military intelligence service.
The war that Russia started against Ukraine will definitely be resolved. Such a statement was made by US President Donald Trump. He said that in order to achieve this, a lot of effort will still be required. It's not easy, but Trump is confident the war will end.
We have ended 8 wars. The only one that has not yet been resolved is Russia against Ukraine. I thought this would be the easiest because of my warm relationship with Putin. It turned out it's not that simple. However, it will be done.
Donald Trump stated that he does not plan to meet with the North Korean dictator, Kim Jong-un, during his tour of Asian countries. Previously, the American president had considered such a possibility, but now he noted that he expects to arrange a meeting with Kim in the near future. According to the head of the White House, North Korea is also interested in dialogue. And, let me remind you, during his first presidential term, Trump met with Kim Jong-un 3 times. And as soon as tomorrow, a meeting between the leaders of the US and China will take place. According to Bloomberg, a major deal is being prepared, under which Donald Trump is ready to lower tariffs for China and to make other concessions. What the head of the White House will demand from Beijing in return is covered in the following report.
On the morning of October 30th, US President Donald Trump will meet with Chinese President Xi Jinping. According to Bloomberg's calculations, in 2025. The leaders have spoken by phone 3 times. The last time was in September when they discussed, among other things, the agreement on TikTok's operations in the United States. They have not met in person since 2019 during Trump's first presidential term.
Tomorrow morning is the most interesting for most people. I think we're in for a great meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping and many issues will be resolved. Yes, I'm very optimistic. I know a little about what's going on because, we've been in contact with them. We're not just going into the meeting knowing nothing, but our relations with China are very good. So I think we'll have a very good outcome for our country and, in fact, for the whole world. I think this is important for the world.
American media, citing sources in the White House, report that in South Korea, Donald Trump and Xi Jinping plan to discuss the possible removal of some export restrictions, tariffs, and duties. Another key topic of the talks is Russia's war against Ukraine. Trump stated that he intends to discuss with the Chinese leader increasing pressure on Moscow.
If China ultimately comes to the same understanding that the US, Europe, and Ukraine already have, that this war is destructive for everyone, both indirectly and directly, and if China becomes interested in ending it, then this will quickly lead, first of all, to a sharp reduction in Russia's resources, secondly, to Russia's loss of independence, meaning it will no longer be able to act or speak on its own, and thirdly, it will finally bring us to the end of the war.
China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs has stated that Beijing is ready for dialogue with Washington. A representative of the ministry emphasized this point. The PRC is interested in the stable and sustainable development of bilateral relations.
Diplomacy at the level of heads of state plays an irreplaceable role in providing strategic guidance for China-US relations. At this meeting, the heads of the two states will have an in-depth exchange of views on strategic and long-term issues regarding China-US relations, as well as other important issues of mutual interest. We are ready to cooperate with the American side to ensure that this meeting yields positive results.
The meeting between Donald Trump and Xi Jinping will be key to resolving the issue of China's participation in sanction pressure on Russia, said U.S. Permanent Representative to NATO Matthew Whitaker on Fox News. In his opinion, involving Beijing in joint pressure on the Kremlin could be a decisive step toward ending Russia's war against Ukraine.
The war should end along the current line of contact, but all of this will accelerate if China takes the side of peace, stops buying Russian oil and gas, and ceases supplying dual-use technologies, whether it's drone components or other technologies used in missiles, to help Russia continue this war.
Kyiv fully supports the U.S. position on strengthening sanctions against Russia.
Right now, China is a major importer of Russian energy resources. If President Trump manages to talk or make a decision to reach an understanding with China to reduce imports of Russian energy, I think that would help us all. In
October, the Trump administration imposed sanctions on Russian companies, Rosneft, Lukoil and their subsidiaries, in order to limit Russia's ability to finance its military-industrial sector and army. The largest importers of Russian oil, India and China, have already begun to reduce their purchases of Russian energy resources. And according to Matthew Whitaker, Washington does not intend to stop. Even tougher restrictions are being prepared. In addition, according to Reuters, next week President Trump plans to meet with the leaders of Central Asian countries, a region that has long been considered Moscow's exclusive sphere of influence.